Okay, this is biodiversity. This is video 6 because I got interrupted during video 5, so video 5 is probably a lot shorter than it was meant to be. And so pending any other catastrophic event, hopefully we will finish this. So, picking up with habitat protection, it's a prevention strategy. If we can protect the habitat before there's any kind of endangerment or loss of biodiversity, that would be the better plan. So habitat protection is always a prevention, not a response. Restoration is the response. It's renewing, repairing, or fixing something that's already been damaged. So reconciliation ecology is where you want to find a way to share space. So, for example, we're using this space, but this other animal needs space. We want to try and find a way to share that space so that we can keep biodiversity as high as possible and not have it to limit ourselves as far as what we need to do from a growth standpoint. So, for example, rather than planting the grass from the stalk like at Lowe's or Home Depot, plant with native species of grass. Keep a habitat, keep cave systems available for bats so they can keep down insects, eliminate pesticides so that we can protect more organisms, stuff like that, so that we can share space with all of the stuff that is around on a daily basis and keep that biodiversity up. So for example, using it to protect bluebirds, we put up boxes, birdhouses, with really, really small holes, and that way only the bluebirds are able to get in there. Non-native larger birds can't compete with the bluebirds because they don't have anywhere to live. And so stuff like that where you apply it specifically to exactly what that key species needs and create it so that it can't be used by other species. So we eliminate that competition. Okay, so zoos, aquariums, natural gardens, botanical gardens, all of these places, when they're used correctly, are good programs. That doesn't mean that every zoo aquarium is automatically a good thing. You really have to kind of look at each individual one. You have to look at their credentials. You have to look at where they're getting their animals, the enclosures and the exhibits they're designing, and the education they use their area or their resource for. But some of the positive things that they do is that they do breeding programs, so they keep genetic diversity up in a lot of these key species, especially these key endangered species like the tigers, for example. They act as protection, so they keep those key species, a small stock anyway, alive and healthy. And the education is just a huge, huge part of the importance of zoos and aquariums. It's really kind of an opinion thing, at least as far as I'm concerned, as to whether you approve of zoos and aquariums or not. And you guys kind of need to make up your own mind whether you think that they're necessary or not necessary, whether you like them or you dislike them. I kind of see them as a necessary evil in that a lot of the time I don't feel that the habitat they design is adequate to the animal. Even though they may be trying very hard. For example, the Houston Zoo tries really, really hard and does as good a job as possible in designing habitat for these animals, but in some cases it's just, it can't ever be enough. It can't ever be close enough to what they would have in the wild. However, that is a necessary evil in that the education they provide to the public about these animals raises awareness, and therefore it turns into ending up being a good thing for the species overall. So it's kind of like who's going to take one for the team, pretty much. And you do know that those animals are incredibly well cared for. So it's kind of a catch-22. You guys really need to decide where you fall on that spectrum. But that's my opinion as far as using aquariums. And there are some individual institutions like the Houston Zoo that I feel do a really good job. And there are some institutions, nothing around here, but there are some institutions that I have not been impressed with at all. And that I won't go to anymore because I don't feel like they're giving enough to the animals, and they're not doing enough to education. It's not making it worth it. You also need to kind of think about it, especially, and we'll talk about this in class, but places that are really just focused on the tourism, the money raising aspect, what they will do to to make money to these animals, and therefore where are they getting their animals and how are they treating their animals. And we're going to talk about that. I don't know if we'll have time now, but for sure after your AP test, we'll take a look at some documentaries and kind of talk about that. And so I won't go to those places. For example, I don't go to SeaWorld, and we can talk about that if you guys are curious. Moving on. Okay, so conservation organizations. Some are really severe. Greenpeace has a very dramatic standpoint. Not that their outlook is necessarily wrong. They're going to defend it violently if necessary. For example, the whaling vessels, they do try to go, or they do, in my opinion, go a little overboard on that one, where they're attacking the people actually carrying out the problem, which is great. I mean, you want them to not be whaling. You want them, to not be killing those whales. There are other organizations that send money, try to pass laws that take a less severe approach. Again, this is kind of an opinion thing to see where you fall on this. In my opinion, again, I really support what Greenpeace has done, is trying to do. I don't like the way they go about it. I feel like, especially for using that whaling, for example, and we'll talk about this some more hopefully as time goes on, but chasing after those Japanese whaling vessels, trying to get in their way and just be obnoxious, may stop them, today, tomorrow, the next day from hunting a whale, which, great, that does make a difference. That's one more whale, 5 more whales that are alive. But is it really going to make a difference in the long run? I really feel like those organizations that are trying to pass laws, that's the key here, is to create the policy, create the law, and then find a way to uphold it. And that's where the change needs to occur, because if we don't educate and we don't create that more global change, it's not going to do a single bit of good to save a whale today that's going to be killed next month or next year because you didn't happen to be at the right place at the right time. So again, that's my opinion. You guys really need to kind of think about these issues and figure out where you fall on it. So the Endangered Species Act in 1973 was one of the toughest environmental laws. It states that it's illegal for Americans to import or trade any product made from an endangered or threatened species unless used for a scientific purpose or for the survival of the species. It authorizes the Marine Fisheries Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service to identify and list the endangered and threatened species, and then limits us from hunting, killing, collecting, or injuring any of them in the U.S. So that's actually why my husband has to go to Russia to do his research, because his research is on Steller sea lions, and even though he's not harming the animals, he's not allowed to get close to them. He can't get the permits to work on them in the U.S., so he goes to the population in Russia to do his research. So stuff like that. So the the Endangered Species Act forbids federal agencies to carry out and fund projects that would jeopardize an endangered species. It makes it illegal for Americans to make money off of endangered species, essentially. So it just kind of limits us and does everything it can to protect those species. So this is what I was saying as far as, creating those laws. This was the first key step, and this is what has made a huge difference, and now we need to find a better way to support that law. So there are other things where, for example, going back to that whaling example, Japan doesn't have these laws. So it's not doing us any good to stop that one Japanese boat from whaling. What we should be doing is talking to the leaders in Japan, getting them to pass a law that they can't hunt whales anymore, and then getting them to enforce that law. And that seems to be the more, not by any means easy, but seems to be the more logical option, in my opinion. Okay, so looking at some of the illegal hunting and poaching, obviously people will ignore the Endangered Species Act. There's still a huge influx of animals, of animal products, living and dead, sold on the black market. Elephants for their tusks, rhinos for the tusks, for the horns. Bushmeat in Africa is from gorilla. Bushmeat is gorilla or monkey. Huge problems with disease spread in this. Looking at HIV/AIDS, the Ebola virus, because obviously primates carry all that, can make us really sick. But bushmeat is really causing a problem in Africa. So, source of protein, so so on and so forth. You guys know what you would use meat for, but it's they use it. And then there's countries that they export it to: Paris, France, Brussels, Belgium, all of those places. I'm sorry, Paris, France, and Brussels, Belgium. It's the end of the day. Have bought this stuff. So again, we don't necessarily need to go down there and fight with the people actually hunting the gorillas. We need to talk to leaders in Paris and get them to stop accepting it. If there's no market, people won't hunt for it. And again, that's the problem. So this is where, with the whaling, if we can make the Japanese people aware of what's going on, most of them are not, we may be able to stop it. These are pictures of the rhinoceros horns curved into dagger handles. So this is some of the stuff that they use it for, and it's incredible amounts of money is what this is, what they're selling these for. So the poachers are making ridiculous amounts of money, so they don't care that they're hunting an endangered species. Showing this picture here, just pause this for a minute and really look at all of the stuff in here. Everything in here was taken, found, confiscated from illegal stuff. And just think about what this really represents. We're not doing a good job of stopping it at this point. It's only about 1/10 of what's going on is what we're stopping. So if this is only 1/10 of what's happening, that shows you how big, how dramatic this really is. And it's just one of the things that really kills me. There have been amendments to the Endangered Species Act that will help landowners protect species on their land. Some people think that the Endangered Species Act is too strong, needs to be either repealed or changed, weakens. Other people think it needs to be strengthened or modified to focus more on an ecosystem approach as opposed to an individual animal approach. This general consensus among most scientists is that we need to focus on sustaining the biodiversity in the ecosystem, and if we do that, then the species will be protected by default. So that's kind of where the scientists are falling right now, is we need to take that ecosystem, that hotspot, large-scale approach. Local examples of endangered species: American alligator, although it's made a huge comeback, peregrine falcon, whooping crane, the bald eagle is also making a comeback, and the grizzly bear. So looking at legal and economic approaches for protecting wild species, there have been international treaties that have helped to reduce the international trade. So that's a start. Again, they're starting to create the laws, create the policies, create the agreements, and now we have to enforce them, and that becomes the problem. So this Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, 1975, was one of the big ones. You may wish to be familiar with that name. 169 countries signed it, and in 900 species it can't be commercially traded. So all of those 169 countries agreed that they're not going to have anything to do legally with those 900 species. Banned all international trade in elephant products, especially. It works together with all of the countries, and again, the poaching and the illegal stuff is still there, but at least legally you can't, and it makes it harder for them. So now we have to work on catching the illegal stuff. So again, what can you do to sustain biodiversity? I'll let you look through this list. It's all pretty self-explanatory, common sense. A lot of it, you guys have been taught since elementary school. The thing is, you really need to do it now. You need to get other people to do it. This is more specific to protect specific species, and again, don't support the trade. If people aren't going to make money off of it, the biggest thing that we can really do is get the word out there. And that's why stuff like that blackfish that just came out, we'll watch that in class at some point, I promise. That's why stuff like that is such a positive step in the right direction as far as I'm concerned, because it makes people aware of the problem. People go to SeaWorld night and day to go see Shamu, and it's great, but they don't realize what's going on behind the scenes. So if you can make people aware of what's going on behind the scenes and what's happening in order for you to see these animals, you may choose not to see it anymore. And so if we can get the word out there, if people aren't going to go, SeaWorld isn't going to make money, it'll shut down and it won't happen anymore. And that's what needs to happen. So this is where, you know, you can make a huge difference, is by getting the word